Dear ladies and gentlemen, пані та панове, this is the 18th episode of the series of conversations and interviews with intellectuals in Ukraine. For those who are out there who are keen to learn more, think deeper, and hear from the original sources. В етері 18-й випуск із серії розмов та інтерв'ю з інтелектуалами в Україні для тих, хто хоче дізнатися більше, думати глибше та чути із перших джерел. This is a project of Pan-Ukraine who are in Ukraine right now under the dark and chaotic conditions of the continuing Russian invasion. There are no words enough to express our admiration of their dedication and commitment. For the guys of Pan-Ukraine, as we are all Ukrainians who are fighting to defend their freedom. Це проєкт «Пан-Україна», які зараз перебувають в Україні в темних і хаотичних умовах триваючого російського вторгнення. Не вистачає слів, аби висловити наше захоплення колегам з «Пан-України», їхньою самовідданістю і наполегливістю, бо зараз ми всі українці, які боронять свою свободу. We also want to support the donation activity initiative by Iryna Starovoyt, a well-known literary critic, systematically collects aid for Kharkiv and the region. Medicine, various medical, humanitarian, and food. He buys and delivers. Kharkiv will be grateful to you for any donations. Ми також хочемо підтримати збір коштів для ініціативи Євгенія Стасиневича. Це наш добре відомий літературний критик, який систематично збирає пожертви для Харкова і для цього регіону. Здебільшого це медицина, різні медичні необхідні речі, гуманітарна допомога та їжа. Він купує, а також доставляє на місце. Харків буде вдячний за будь-який ваш вклад. The project is co-hosted by Pan International, which has continued to provide a platform for freedom of expression for those currently under the highest risk. Our partners today are Kniholov, Pan America, the Ukrainian Institute, the Ukrainian Institute London, the Harvard University Ukrainian Research Institute, and the Harriman Institute at Columbia University. We are streaming today's event to all partners' Facebook pages. Співорганізаторами проєкту є Міжнародний ПЕН, який продовжує надавати платформу для свободи вираження поглядів для тих, хто зараз перебуває у групі найвищого ризику. Сьогодні нашими партнерами є Книголам, Пен Америка, Український інститут Лондона, Український науково-дослідний інститут Гарвардського університету та інститут Гаррімана при Колумбійському університеті. Ми транслюємо сьогоднішню подію на всі партнерські сторінки у Facebook. Захід відбуватиметься англійською мовою. Our speakers today are those who can put the light on the humanitarian context of the ongoing situation, especially very deeply, especially through the pain. Our guest from Ukraine is Iryna Starovoyt, a poet, essayist, and associate professor of cultural studies in the Ukrainian Catholic University. She teaches, meanwhile, critical and creative thinking, history of ideas and cultural practices, and leads a research seminar in cultural studies, and has been lecturing and reading at dozens of universities in different countries of the world. She authored 3 volumes of poetry and a number of essays. She serves as an academic director of the Biennale of Trust, co-edited Ukraina Moderna, and co-organized literary festival Lam City. And she will speak with a guest I was waiting for long, Heather Morris, the person with a very interesting personal story, but with the books you can't avoid. Once you read, you're always with it. Heather Morris was born in New Zealand and moved to Australia as an adult. She took a degree in political science, worked in the social work department at a hospital, completed as a veteran athlete in shot put, discussed javelin and hammer throwing, and wrote screenplays before turning and to writing the story of her friend, Leil Sokolov. This story is probably how you know Heather. The story became the best-selling The Tattoos of Auschwitz. And this is a book I was literally crying from the very beginning to the end. And this is a book also not only of pain, but a book of hope. And this is probably the context we would like to speak today. So, dear ladies, stage is yours. Heather?
Thank you, Hola. Thank you very much. It's an absolute honor for me to be here this evening speaking with Iryna. And I hope in the next sort of 40 minutes or so that the two of us can engage you in a conversation as we share stories and our hopes and our dreams regarding the situation currently unfolding in the Ukraine. I'm going to start by asking Iryna a question. I doubt that there's a simple answer to it, but if you could try, please. Iryna, I very simply want to know, how are you?
Well, I think we here are doing these small reports or small morning rehearsals every single day with our friends, with our relatives, with our dears, with my students also. How are you? Where are you? Are you relatively safe? And I think this word relatively says it all. Because, you know, it's a real war. It's an intensive war of a kind which Europe hasn't seen for almost 80 years, I must say. And when I asked myself that very morning, the morning of February 24, when I have been woke up by my daughter, who told, you know, they started. We all knew what they started, and I believe it was not a surprise that much to Ukrainian society as it was for many other societies across the globe, just because there is a trace of a kind of historical trauma here, this land, this people, this society. So you can call it intuition of the victim. The victim knows when the worst is come, let's say. And I asked myself, what do I know about wars? I have not been prepared to live through the war. I have not raised my child to be living through the war. And this is so contradictory to my worldview and to my values. And then I also asked myself, who are the people who are now going to war? Who are the people from Ukrainian side who stand up to defend their own values, to defend their own emancipation, let's say, because it's in many ways emancipatory thing also. And I answered to myself, these are pacifists who go to war. That probably was not so obvious in the first days or even in the first weeks to the West, that we didn't expect fighting and we didn't want fighting in any way, and that within 30 years of independence, until the annexation of Crimea and the start of the smaller war on the eastern border of Ukraine, none of us was willing to spend money or effort in rebuilding the big pride in the military, or we were shrinking our military forces year by year, decade by decade. And actually Ukraine was the country who deliberately wanted to get rid of the nuclear power, which has been part of the Soviet system. And we wanted to enter the global society with a blank record. We had this huge nuclear catastrophe, which taken place in 1986 at Chernobyl nuclear plant. And we don't want to threaten anybody with nukes. And more than that, we don't want to threaten anybody with any other kind of military equipment. But it seems like at least last 8 years, since we were under this current threat from our northern neighbor, Russia, with which we share 1,340 kilometers of the land border and over 400 kilometers of the sea border. We would not be safe until I think now we would not be safe until Ukraine will end this war and win this war. And it's a new situation for us, and it's new situation for the Western security, and it's probably a new situation for the globe. But now we have to be quite sure that democracy should be equipped and cherished and defended very well, that actually it has to be defended better if it not want to surrender to autocratic or totalitarian regimes across the globe.
Yes, look, I think you hit the nail on the head there by saying that probably many countries became complacent as the Second World War ended, the Cold War rolled on, and it was easy to just fall into that, okay, well, you know, we're all getting on, we're now one big happy global family, when we really never were. But as long as it was happening in somebody else's backyard, in some ways it was easy to turn a blind eye. And you all know in the Ukraine and everywhere that it's not the case now. I have never known the kind of support. Yes, I didn't live through the Second World War, but the kind of global support, not just from the governments of countries, but from every man, woman, and child around the world who is there with you. From my young, tiny grandchildren, the youngest at 7, he's learned enough to know enough, and he wants to know what's going on. The little ones, we're keeping it from them. So the support is there. Can I just sort of perhaps go and touch on something else you said? You talked about historical trauma. And that's something which I know a little bit about, not because I'm a professional, but because I've spent many years talking to survivors who have endured that. And then on the other hand, I worked in a hospital where every day for 20 years, I dealt with people who were having what's called acute trauma and tragedy. And you've got both going right now. You've got the acute. It's how do I survive today? Am I going to wake up tomorrow morning? Plus, as you've already alluded to, the historical trauma, which, as you know, it comes through your DNA. How do you feel that historical trauma is going to help with the resilience for your fellow countrymen to now deal with the acute?
Dear Heather, I have been trained as a literary scholar, and I moved into the cultural studies domain quite early after my graduation. But I think that my major question to my education, and probably major complaint to my education at school, which was still in the Soviet Union, and then at the university, which was immediately post-Soviet university. So in many ways, it was still Soviet university. Nevertheless, probably in certain dimensions, also anti-Soviet. My major question was why I have been taught so many things which are irrelevant, and so little things which are relevant, for example, to my family history, or to the immediate experience of people who started to visit Ukraine since 1991, since it started to be free and independent and open to the world. And what I understood first was that my country and my people were heavily hit by both world wars. It's not only the Second World War, which of course is much more remembered by nowadays probably is something very important, not only in our historical worldview, but also in our ethical grid. With the slogan "Never Again," and I was absolutely sure that in my lifetime I would never find myself in a situation of a global or major event which could be compared to the real ground, air, informational propaganda, and all other kinds of wars I have been taught from history. But from the other side, I also understood that, for example, families like mine, part of which comes from the western part of Ukraine, part of which comes from the northern eastern part of Ukraine, closer to Belarusian border, that actually they never had enough representation or enough understanding in school textbooks or school programs. But more than that, there were also other communities in the land of Ukraine, be them Jewish communities, Polish communities, Hungarian, Slovak, Belarusian, some others, and of course, Russian-speaking community, which were not enough understood and not enough researched and not enough represented, not only at the curricular level, but even in public imagination, even in our talks about what their experience of the suffering is and why it is so important. So when I have been approached as 25 years girl by a Jewish visitor of my city of Lviv, of where is the Jewish cemetery, what do I know about Holocaust, how it all has happened here, believe me, I was quite surprised, because for me, as for many Ukrainians, Holocaust was something which happened across the border, somewhere in Poland, somewhere in Auschwitz. But why are you asking about Lviv, for example, or why are you asking about Kyiv, Zhytomyr, other places? Then I started to connect the dots. And for example, in Ukrainian literature, there was this important topos of Babin Yar, the big ravine, which was turned into a mass grave in September 1941, in the first days, actually, when Nazi Germany only arrived at the place and started to create this new world order they were longing to. And I knew about 30,000 or probably more than 30,000 people, ordinary cave dwellers, who were gathered, who were illusioned that they would be taken to some other places, and then they were just slaughtered there within 2 days and 2 nights. So for my young imagination, it was already too much. But then I also understood that not many knew or understood even this place, or not many Kievans were ready to think about it, to talk about it as their own memory, their intimate memory, let's say, the local one, because it was somebody else community, somebody else memory. And we have started a big discussion here, I would say societal discussion, somewhere at the beginning of the years 2000, so at the brink of the millennium, that this particular piece of land is a piece where the tragedy was unfolding and the blood was spilled over and over through a couple of generations. In the First World War, twice the front line was going forward and backward. So the civilians were targeted, and we know that in the First World War it was already very uncivilized war because civilians were targeted en masse, and the chemical weapon was introduced, and their bombardments through the air has been introduced. So that all went very, very wrong. But after that, there was also the longer war. We call it here civil war, which was 5 years more than just 1914, 1918, as in global history. And Ukrainians were fighting at that time for their independence. On the ruins of the empires like Austria-Hungary, Germany, Russian Empire, and Ottoman Empire, new political entities were emerging. And some of them were more successful or more familiar to European imagination. Some were less successful. And as we know well, later on, somewhere in 1938, British Premier Minister Chamberlain unfamously said that Czechoslovakia is a far and unknown country. That's why we would not support it in this conflict with Nazis. So nobody knows who they are actually. Maybe they just want to be part of the Nazi system. And for me, it was already this very important historical marker that it is important to be known, it is important to be heard, it is important to get into friendship with neighbors, with many other possible countries and cultures. So we know well that contact, contrast, and conflict, the scenarios of the civilizations and cultures which were somehow neighboring each other or approaching each other. But there is also the fourth possible scenario, and we praised it since 1989, since the moment of so-called Velvet Revolutions in the Central and Eastern Europe, that there is cooperation scenario. When you contrast with somebody, when you get in contact with somebody, it not necessarily brings you conflictual relationship. It could be cooperational relationship. The benefit of win-win situation, the benefit when we can find solutions for our problems and can somehow support each other. And diving into the history of 20th century, I understood that for some reasons, these win-win scenarios were very rare, or very often they were actually broken violently, and some other genes started to appear from the bottles. And these genes were spirits of hatred, spirits of violence, and spirits of a kind, in order my children survive, your children have to die. And till nowadays, I think that from one side, Ukrainians are those who survived. Our ancestors were resilient enough to survive, but at the same time, they went through such situation and such heavy choices that they were on the brink of the humanity. So because of that, some of their tragic experience was just sealed as a traumatic experience, collective traumatic experience. It was never discussed. And it was even repressed from the above because, for example, the topic of Holocaust was not part of the public discussion or historical research or literature and the movie scene in the Soviet period. So that's why, as a young educated girl, I knew about Schindler's List, but I knew nothing about the possibility to have 100 more Schindler Lists staged right at the place of local history across Ukraine. And I think it was this big change that I have introduced in my teaching world literature and later on cultural studies, that all my students knew where these places were. They knew what it was all about. They understood, at least partly, how humanity is fragile and how the skin of humanity could be just broken very easily, and how hard it is to restore humanity back. And I remember very well, I will finish at this, famous Jewish historian who studied Holocaust for many decades came up with a very important and very transparent formula. What is the lesson of never again? What is the lesson of the Holocaust and civilian suffering inflicted by the big powers of the 20th century? And he had this very important notion. You will never be a victim again. You will never be a perpetrator again. And please never be the bystander, indifferent bystander again.
Yeah.
I believe this is something with which Ukrainians now are face to face, that if the rest of humanity would be just indifferent bystanders, we would be the Jews of 21st century. And just because there were some very major miscalculation on the side of Russian nomenclatura and Mr. Putin himself, we are now supported with such a huge wave of solidarity across the globe. And I believe this is not because everybody loves Ukrainians. It's because we now represent the democratic humanity part, which is exposed to the radical evil. And if the evil would not be stopped, I believe the wave will go further, but it also will broken some of promises of the previous generation, that we will never go into darkness as sleepwalkers, that we will have some red lines, or we will have some ringing bells. If we hear them, we would never move in that direction. So unfortunately, this already big tragedy, but I believe we are now reverting altogether even the bigger tragedy.
Look, this is just so heartwarming to hear what you're saying, because you're right. Those two key words for you were cooperation and education. I've got to think that maybe it's a bit easier in this day and age for both of those things to be spread, given that media, be it social or the traditional, can play a bigger role in letting everybody know what's going on. And that's certainly what's happening right now. As you know, there's not a news broadcast down here in Australia, radio or television, that doesn't start and end with the current update of the situation in Ukraine. The amount of people here that are just opening not only their wallets, but their hearts and their homes. And that is not going to stop. I just know that. I keep wondering, I hope we don't get to a situation here or in other countries where we get numbed by it and think, well, it's just going on too long now and we haven't made a difference. So we just switch off. I can't see that happening. It's been every day since it began. From what I see, everyone is still wanting to know. It's a conversation I have with everyone I know. What we can do, I know, as individuals is very limited. We can support with helping with fundraising for the needs of the people who return and those that have been displaced. And we can lobby our governments, and the Australian government's done a little bit. They can do more. They can do more, absolutely. How do you feel about the amount of help that you have received from a military perspective from outside governments, bearing in mind that they can't, or they won't, and I don't understand that, but they won't have what they call boots on the ground?
You know, it's a very important development which has been taking place even before the dire days come, when the Minister of Defense has been taken under control of a civil society. And I don't know whether you know that our Minister of Defense is not a ranked officer. He is a lawyer, and
Okay.
he comes from this part of the society which was just thinking really about defense, not about the military power or superpower. And Alexei Reznikov did a very good work in the last months prior to this big invasion to gather support and to gather understanding in the West that Ukraine is under great threat, and this threat is real, and we will fight, but we need some equipment and we need some technological support, because this war will be quite exhaustive and long. The other side of the story is that some of our Western partners here in Europe, they did not believe Ukrainians will be resilient enough. And there were talks that in 3 days or in 5 days, probably in 1 week, Ukraine will surrender. And there would be nothing surprising in that if we surrender. The surprise was going otherwise, that the human capital proved to be very important in the dire situations like this, and the horizontal networks of support and the cooperation between front and rear, and this human solidarity, which was first shown among Ukrainians to other Ukrainians, it in certain way also patterned the reaction in our near neighborhood, in Poland, in Slovakia, in Czechia, in Romania, and then of course in Germany, in Britain, in Canada, America, Australia. And we are very, very heartfelt and grateful for that. And I understood that probably it could not be said without some bitter irony, that Ukrainians think every help is coming very good and very properly, but a little bit not timely. It's a little bit too late. So we asked you to help like 2 months ago. Now we have this, thank you. Yeah. But now we need also some extra. And you also see that this war is a war of particular cruelty. It's a war of destruction, and it's not only physical destruction, which of course is very, very damaging and already heartbreaking, but it's also the war on destruction of human behaviors and human solidarity and human empathy to each other. Because to have empathy, you have to also have some basic, you have to have some resources for empathy. That's why I cherish your book so much, and the story of Lali and Gita Sokolov, because they found some resources of this empathy, even in the most darkest place, in the most darkest time. So probably now I switch to you and your experience, and I would also like to say, sorry for putting it so bluntly, but your books were translated both in Ukrainian and Russian. I know that.
I know.
And the prominent film also has been screened both in Ukraine and in Russia. How do you explain, Heath, why we read the same books, why we look at the same stories and come up with so different understanding of that and so different illusions?
I don't know enough about the people in Russia and their reading and grasping of my books to know that they don't think any differently to you, that the average man and woman just trying to lead their life are not thinking the same as you, that in fact it is just the leaders of that country that are doing this damage. I'm not hearing enough about the support that they are getting from their country. You will know more about that than I do. But you're right, that they've been published in both countries. They're read in both countries. I get lovely emails from people in those countries. My second book, Silka's Journey, was about the young girl that was not only in the Holocaust, but she was 10 years in a Siberian gulag. And when I was researching her story about her time in that gulag in Vorkuta, the Russian researcher I had was telling me how she was hearing from so many other people in Moscow, where she lives, the support for my stories and for them being understood. So it's a really tough one. I do not have a clear answer for how the different readers in those two countries interpret or accept what they read. They do, and I'm grateful. Can I just come back? Look, I know I keep coming back to you because I really think that what we need to be hearing here a lot is from you in terms of what you're going through right now and what your country needs. But when you mentioned that your Minister of Defense was a lawyer, I don't know if you've heard of an American man called Benjamin Frennick. Now, he wrote a book 2 years ago at the age of 100. This man, not only was he a Jewish man who, in America, who was in the military, in the army, the American army, but he was the first prosecutor of the Nazis at the Nuremberg trials, a young 27-year-old man. He took those first 22 Nazis to trial and got them convicted. And he has spent the rest of his life forming the world court of crime and trying to bring together every country to say that there are crimes against humanity, and where they are, they must be called out and there must be charges. And his overarching sort of response to the only way, he says, humanity is actually going to survive and continue to thrive is not by conflict, but by the rule of law. Now, I'm a huge fan of this man's, and only about 3 nights ago, I watched an interview on CNN in America with Christian Amanpour with him. And again, having him, he's now 103. And the wisdom that this man has got from his life experience is something which everybody I've put his book onto totally grasp and get and want to and follow his story. It's a very small book. It's under 200 pages, and it's called Parting Words, 9 Lessons for a Remarkable Life. I can only hope that somewhere the leaders in the US can get this man and get him talking to the rest of the world about what he did and bringing to justice those crimes against humanity. He was the first person ever to stand up in a court and say, these are crimes against humanity. This was genocide. And to say that, and I can hope that ultimately that will play out. But right now, we've got to get you through to that point where your country is now strong, it's back. You have world support. Well, maybe there's one or two other countries out there, maybe not. But
I thank you for touching upon this, and I believe in this particular series, Dialogues on War, one of the first episodes was with Philippe Sands, a famous British lawyer and also researcher and writer, pen member, who researched the story of the two terms you have just mentioned, crime against humanity and genocide. And both of them were invented by lawyers who went through the atrocities of, who observed atrocities of the suffering inflicted on civilians of Jewish origins, most of all, through the Second World War. These lawyers, one of them at that moment was based in Britain, that was Herr Schlauterpacht, and he came up with the term crime against humanity. Another one, his name was Raphael Lemkin. At that moment, he was a refugee on the US ground, and he came up with the term of genocide. But both of them were educated at the university I have graduated from here in Lviv. At that time, it was Lembergfest and Lvov in Polish transcription later. So why is it so? He is trying to explain in his very brilliant autobiographic book, which also bring him to the ancestors nearby Lviv in the Zhokwa town in Shtetl. Philippe Sands is saying, because these young men were trained by lawyers, which were not only theoretics, but they also lived in the community, which was very complex, which was like community of communities or society of societies, because it was triple formula. And there were different religions, there were different languages, there were different cultural communities. Some of them were more progressive, others were more conservative, some were easier to accommodate and to adapt to the new reality. Others were making certain resistance, but they all were city dwellers of the modernity of the beginning of 20th century. So there was some common ground. There was also some this bunch of enlightenment, which was a good thing for them all. And more than that, they all shared not only portion of humanity, but also the same language through which they can reach to each other and know a little bit more about each other. Like for the first through German language by Austrian times, and later on through Polish language, but also have an outlook in the inner world of the neighbors, of the close neighbors. And it's very important to see that, for example, formula of European Union was union in diversity. And for Ukraine, which I represent, it was exactly that feeling. We are united, but at the same time, we are very diverse. And there are so many things we are quarreling about. And in this respect, we are, through the time of the new independence since 1991, we very often were resembling some big Italian family, that we were quarreling and discussing, sometimes very loudly, between East and West, between Russian-speaking and Ukrainian-speaking. We also had some Crimean Tatar population, and very important story behind that, and very important trauma of displacement and Stalinist repression behind that. But what we shared all together was this notion that Stalin and Stalinist crimes were equal evil to Nazi and Nazi genocides. So the Stalin camps were actually same concentration labor camps. They lasted longer, and they never have been called the perpetrators never have been called to proper justice. And this feeling of some historical open wound, let's say, that was something which also united us in dynamics and united us in empathy to every big wound, to every grief, to every family story, and to every language which for certain reason was not vocal enough and was not represented enough. So Ukrainians were listening, they were ears. And Russians, I believe, at least last 20 years, they were more loud, they were more mouth, they were representing this celebratory narrative of great victory in the Second World War, which they called Great Patriotic War, which is true for them, but they somehow forgot the very essence of it. We are on May 9 or May 8, we are in grief, in the deepest possible grief about the mistakes and atrocities of humanity, which never should be repeated. And at certain point, I believe it was as early as 2004, 2005, in the Russian society, there was planted this narrative, можем повторить, we can repeat. And this notion that we can repeat what exactly? Repeat the war, repeat the victory, repeat the atrocity. What exactly you plan to repeat? So now, unfortunately, we see that this capacity of unleashed evil is almost limitless, and there should be a big resistance to limit it to its origin, and then to punish it and to call it to justice, because without it, it will be repeated again and again.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, because those are two phrases which everybody relates to the Holocaust, but it goes beyond just the Holocaust. The never forget, never again. It's very easy to say the words and to continue in a society and in a community where they don't have the meaning, because down here in Australia, we have not had the kind of threat, not only the threat, but we've not had any conflict actually on the soil here, other than a little bit in the Second World War. And I totally, in some ways, get what you're saying, purely because of the number of people I have spent time with. Most recently, 2 weeks ago, I was in Israel with a 96 and a 98-year-old survivors of the Holocaust. They're part of my latest book, The Three Sisters. And to be with them, to be with Lali and Guy, to be with all these survivors who I've met, not only of Holocaust, but other atrocities, and here, they still have hope that they survived, and that mankind will do the right thing by them, that humanity will do the right thing. Otherwise, why did we survive? Why did I endure those 3 years? And when you spend time with these beautiful elderly ladies and see how they've been able to now carve an incredible family life and a legacy of 4 generations, but still see that pain in them that never goes away. Yes, like you said about your own people, they repress it, they keep it down. But on the other hand, they're also looking out for their families, knowing, I can't tell you the horrors I went through because you will never go through them, because I survived so that you don't. And I think for the people of Ukraine right now that are both surviving in your country and that have left, I'm hoping to return very, very soon. I know that the world community will come together to rebuild your country. You will not be left alone to do that. I just know that in my bones, that the investment that we are giving to your country to survive what you're doing right now does not end when those tanks roll out of your country. It will continue. And that for all of those people, yourself included, who just might think that they're just ordinary people trying to survive, trying to get through, they may be, but you are living through extraordinary times. And at some point, I think individually and collectively, you will go, we've come through this incredible, extraordinary, evil period, and we are going to be the stronger for it. That it's repeated itself in your beautiful country just appalls me. And you're right, the Ukraine had its own sort of Holocaust, that the ravine where those 30,000 people, and in a lot of ways that was different to a lot of other European countries other than Poland. The people of Slovakia and Czech Republic and Hungary and Romania, they were not mass murdered on their own soil. You have got a place where this actually happened, and it's on your own soil. And from that, you take that and you remember that and you go, okay.
Yeah, and before that,
them?
yeah, before that, 10 years earlier or 8 years earlier, on the Soviet part of Ukraine, there was another big atrocity, which is now recognized by the world, which is the big famine, or we call it in Ukrainian, Holodomor. And it also was exactly the same, that neighbors were seeing other neighbors dying, and sometimes even enabling them to die. So because of ideology, who wanted to crash Ukrainian villagers and their way of living, because they were not easy to surrender to collective farming and this absolutely alien idea which has been brought from Moscow and executed through Kharkiv. At that moment, it was exactly Ukrainian Soviet Republic capital. We now know that about 4 million of Ukrainians in villages were direct victim of the famine. And we all know it's not only that people lost their dignity in life, but they also lost their dignity in the way they were dying, and in that fact that they were not buried properly, and that their graves, mass graves, were never observed with diligence and the tragic memory. Their tragic memory actually was forbidden and erased in the country. So there are trauma over trauma over trauma. And probably last thing I want to remark is that I see my life project in the humanities, in cultural studies, that I was involved in a big collective effort to recreate Ukrainian society from the scratches as a cruelty-free society. And it was happening on all possible levels, on the level of how we raise children, how we talk to children, what we tell our children, what kind of example we serve, how we behave with our neighbors and neighborhood. Are we kind enough to our nature? Are we kind enough to our ecology? And all these things were gradually from the grassroots moving up and actually served us better and better. And the idea of good governance was introduced, and a lot of corruption of which we were accused, it was corruption of which we were only a transit country. The same thing as we were transit country for Russian gas, we often were also transit country for Russian corruption. It was not like Russia was not trying to somehow destroy it or defect or deconstruct Ukrainian governing or Ukrainian self-government. So we were all these years democratic country with many faults, of course, with many stupid things, but there was a corrective mechanism in place, and every next round of elections we were trying to correct ourselves, and we were actually doing very often right choices, and we were supporting them with further energy and societal support. And all this now is also destructed. And probably my big question is, how will we appear from this war? Because I have little doubt now that Ukrainians will win and will somehow restore their country. But I believe our hearts will be hardened. And many of the things we were taught our children and we were taught ourselves are in a way irrelevant in the moment of war. And the post-war, as you know that well, it doesn't come on the day of the peace treaty.
No, far from it. Look, you've summed this up beautifully. Can I just add one more aspect of what you're enduring and what will play out in the years to come as people return and as the people are helped to settle either in their country, hopefully all in their country or wherever they are, there is one aspect of war and conflict which, to my total understanding and belief, is not looked at enough, which is not considered. And it's a tough one to end on, and it really is, but it's important to me that I say it. And that is that it is acknowledged and that it is helped and it is pointed out the sexual abuse of women and girls that goes on during these times. It is something that I am very, very passionate about talking about, which is why I wrote Silke's story. And it is something which I just know that your country, as it rebuilds and comes together, you will not allow the women who were the victims of this abuse to be in any way shamed, but to be supported, and for everyone to unite behind them as they try and deal with that added trauma. It's a different level of trauma again. I have seen it in the eyes and the faces and in the words of too many people. In this instance, can you please stand up and look after that aspect of this horrible, horrible, evil period?
Yeah, I must say that in this respect, we also have a lot of help from abroad, and psychologists are in place, and lawyers are in place, and many international refugee help is in place. So these people who already suffered more than you can actually stand, yeah, so they would not be shamed within their own societies. And
Yes.
Again, I just want to loop back to this talk about the cruelty-free and empathical way of upbringing, which Ukrainians were demonstrated even in, this cruelty-free string was observed even in Stalinist labor camps. That Ukrainians were resilient, Ukrainians were in solidarity with others, they were sharing of last things with others, and they were very empathical, not only within the community, but also outside their own community, to other labor slaves, to other people who were in the same their positions as they. Sometimes they were even empathical to their perpetrators. And we have a famous Ukrainian poet who spent more than 10 years in Brezhnev camps. So it was also, we know now, not long ago, the Soviet Union actually collapsed. But of course, his perpetrators were doing everything that Vasil Stus don't know, that it is at the brink of possible crack. And they were trying to persuade him that your words are worthless, your language is dying, nobody will know about you, you will die here at the zone in camp, and your own son and relatives will be ashamed of you as anti-Soviet element. And Stus was empathic enough to think of his perpetrators as equal slaves, but on the other side of the ideology. So I want to believe in these depths of humanity, in these big hearts. And I also want to believe that Ukrainians, after these very trying events, and 21st century was supposed not to be like that, that Ukrainians will be leaders of humanitarian aid, leaders of support, leaders of sharing of experience of survival, and they will be the guards of humanity for the next generations.
Beautifully, beautifully said. Can I just sort of end by saying, Iryna, it has been one of the highlights of my life to be speaking with you here this evening. To the folks at PEN Ukraine, thank you from the bottom of my heart for this privilege of being here with you this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, dear ladies. That was a brilliant exercise on fragile humanity with a deep cultural background, cooperation, solidarity, and education as a basic platform for never again. And this is exactly what we all can take from these conversations, deeper understanding. Today may be more questions like what humanity is, and some answers about what can I do to help. And today I can quote both. Heather said, open your wallets, open your home, open your heart. And Iryna, never go to darkness. Thank you both for those words. what we can learn from Ukrainians, painful lessons of never again. Never be a victim, never be a penetrator, never be a bystander. The great country of human capital, incredible survivance, and immortal hope. We are grateful to our partners for today's event, Kniголав and personally Oля Vishnya, for making things happen. This is what I hate about those online events, that I can't ask you to sign the book. And our traditional partners, Pan America, the Ukrainian Institute, the Ukrainian Institute London, Ukraine, the Harvard University Ukrainian Research Institute, and the Harriman Institute at Columbia University, and for all the cross-streaming service on all the partners' pages. Gratitude, of course, to PEN Ukraine, which continues to stand at the front lines in the name of freedom and truth. And I want to remind you about the important fundraising initiative of Yevgen Stasinevich, a well-known literary critic who switched to be a volunteer nowadays and systematically collects aids for Kharkiv and the region, medicine, various medical, humanitarian, and food. He buys and delivers. Kharkiv will be grateful for any donation. You can find all the details in comments. Ukraine needs your help. PEN International is proud to be a platform that supports freedom of expression. Thank you one more time, our dear guests. There was a lot of the conversation with a lot of insights. Thank you, our viewers. And next episode will be held next week, 27th of April at 5 p.m. Kyiv time, 3 p.m. London time. Our guest will be Tamara Gundarova, literary critic, culturologist, and expert on Ukrainian literature, modernism, postmodernism, postcolonial criticism, kitsch, Chernobyl, and feminism. What a set. And she will talk with Nana Janelidze, Georgian film director, screenwriter, and composer. Follow our dialogues on war and spread the word, stand with Ukraine. Remember, this is our shared responsibility today. Thank you.